Today on our Recipients series, I'm talking with Ruby Susan Mountford. Ruby's contribution to LGBTIQA+ and disability communities and work in community development and inclusion has involved co-authored research reports, co-designed resources for self-advocacy and employment inclusion, and developing an accessibility inclusion action plan for Thorn Harbour Health to reduce barriers and support community participation for LGBTIQA+ people with disabilities. And I'll just tell you about, hi, I'll just tell you about the award that Ruby has received. In the National Awards for Disability Leadership, Ruby is the recipient of the Inclusion Award, which goes to a person who has illustrated the intersectional diversity of disabled people by designing processes, systems, or programs. And intersectional, of course, is when we have disability alongside other factors like gender, LGBTIQA+, being a First Nations person, etc. So it's
sometimes all of those at once.
Sometimes all of those at once, absolutely. So it's all of the meetings of things. And what we know is that the disability community is one of the most diverse communities there is. So it's a fantastic thing to be joined by you today, Ruby. Thanks so much for making time for us.
Oh, it's so exciting to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And it's always a bit, I think, I find it always a bit intimidating to hear my own kind of info get read out when I'm sitting there trying to respond to it.
Absolutely, yes. Nothing like the bio. Yeah. So how did you get into being an activist in the intersectional space, the disability LGBTIQA+ space? What led you to that?
So I started, I think, by volunteering at Joy 94.9, the LGBTIQA+ community radio station. And that was the year I had just been diagnosed as an autistic person. And at the same year, I had received my diagnosis for ADHD. But they weren't things I was really very well ready to talk about. But as I was starting to work in radio, and this was all during the postal survey that was happening, I was also starting to do a lot of work around bisexuality, which is, you know, an identity that is often erased and misunderstood and carries a lot of stigma in it in both straight spaces and queer spaces. And it was also through there that I was starting to meet other activists, specifically in bi and multigender attracted spaces and trans spaces that were also autistic. It was my first time really meeting other autistic people and starting to talk about that. And then because I was already starting to do some public speaking around bisexuality, I was asked if I would mind speaking on a panel around disability for the 2018 LGBTIQ Women's Health Conference. And that was for women and non-binary people who are comfortable in that space. And so I think that was, again, my first time kind of sitting, and I was there with Margarita Coppolino, who's a fantastic disability activist, as well as Roseanne Bernstein. And so people who I was just kind of really, I was listening to and just feeling very, this word's always so tricky in our spaces. I was feeling inspired. But I think it was through there, and also the same sense of whenever I shared anything about being bisexual, there was always somebody, at least one person, who'd say that was the first time I heard someone else articulate my experience. And I was starting to recognize that was happening when I was talking about being autistic. And that breakthrough, actually, a friend of mine was the producer for a show on ABC Radio, and they were doing an episode about dating when you're autistic. And so I sent him a message just saying, oh, just a few things to keep in mind, like you might want to be aware of this and just be aware of this. And then he was asking me, I wanted to be on the show to talk about it. And I didn't really feel like I was qualified. You know, I didn't feel autistic enough really to be able to speak to that experience. But in the end, someone called into the show, and he was, when I was on, and he was very, very worried because he was going for his autistic assessment the next day, and he didn't know what that was going to mean for him. And I remember just thinking about the fears I'd had and coming out the other side of that. And I just told him he'd be the same person he was the day before, just maybe with more language to understand what he was going through. And I think it was when that kind of clicked for me that I was the same person I'd always been, just with a much better understanding of myself. And by sharing that, it was helping. And I think as a lot of autistic people who are diagnosed later in life, I'd spent a lot of life really struggling in ways that it felt like no one could really see. And so I think there was that sense of wanting to be able to start to reach out to people who are struggling in similar ways. And it started off, I think, as a lot of activism starts off, because we've got something to prove to ourselves, to our communities. We want a sense of, like, you know, as a lot of people, disabled people do, I wanted to feel valued. And then it turned out I was a very good public speaker, and great for live radio because my chattering can be quite entertaining, and it was great when someone couldn't make it. So I had to just be able to talk for 5 minutes straight without a break about anything. And but honestly, I think it's been through meeting other people and being able to find myself through them and see them find themselves through me, and find and get a better sense of who we are and our place in the world, and everything I've gained from being in these spaces where identity is loud and identity is bright and proud.
Fantastic. It's really interesting because you know, one of the things we know about the disabled community, the disability community, is you know, apart from its diversity, we're also dealing with our disabilities. You know, we're doing that stuff on a day-to-day basis. So what kind of barriers or challenges have you faced along the way to achieving things in your work? You know, I mean, we've all dealt with prejudice and ableism from time to time, but you know, how have you tackled that stuff, responded to it, so that you're able to continue the work that you're doing?
I think particularly when it's happening in the work, the biggest barrier has been, I'd say, burnout, and that feeling of I'm not being taken seriously. People aren't taking this seriously, and I'm pouring so much of myself into it, and I'm seeing nothing change. That's been, I think, the hardest thing. And like, don't get me wrong, being in meetings where I can't possibly follow what's happening and missing deadlines, or like, you know, and having to be adrift for months at work that don't have good onboarding processes, and all those things have definitely also been really dispiriting and really, really tricky to navigate, and to separate from, again, my sense of self and the instinctual response, because it's a well-worn and well-trodden path in my head of being, I'm just not good enough for this. I can't keep up. I can't get it done. I'm drowning, and that's on me. But also, as a part of my job, actually knowing, well, it's actually not. There are all these things that would have been done and should be done, and they're not in place. And then it becomes the barrier of when you start to give up on people around you, and start to really, with, like, I would get angry and withdrawn. In my job, especially when my jobs where I was trying to, you know, when we're trying to address these barriers, where we're trying to shine a spotlight on them and saying, look, I know you're not hitting this, but I keep smashing into this wall, and I keep showing you the wall, and you say you recognize the wall as a problem, but it's been a year and the wall is still here. So how do you actually, and then it starts to get tricky. I think the biggest, often for me, the other things are, again, time management can be very difficult. I haven't got a great sense of time horizons. I get overwhelmed because my brain finds it hard to prioritize. Like, all things come in at once and have to be done at once. So for project management, which I've had to teach myself, and, like, you know, learn from downloading templates off the internet and from seeing examples from other people, that can be very, very tricky. And as well, I think there's always that flare up of disclosure and how much to tell people, if people are going to think I'm making excuses, and how I can get very twisted up and get very hard on myself about those things. And so I think it's also been when I'm in a space and I'm the only person like me in the space, and the work I'm doing is to try and open that space up. But that can feel like you're trying to build a raft while you're in the middle of the ocean. You know, it's that sense of, or, you know, you're trying to build something that you need to stay, because, and people don't recognize that the reasons that there's no one else there to do it is because of the way things are. And I think it's dealing with the indifference and the resistance and the different ways resistance shows. It's people forgetting that I'm disabled all the time because of invisible disabilities and people's ideas of what autism is or isn't. But honestly, for the most part, it's people who really like the idea of accessibility, but having to deal with their discomfort and reluctance when they see the work that's involved, and having to make myself digestible, as opposed to saying, well, no, you've got to fucking do it.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm loving the truths you're telling, Ruby. This is making my day for me. Uh, what what will this award, receiving this award, mean for you?
I think it is a big reminder of how easy it is for me to downplay my own achievements in my own head. Even I think when I saw that, like, I hesitated when I saw I'd been shortlisted for this. I also saw the other people who were shortlisted with me. I was like, okay, well, look, it's great that I got there, but I think this is it. But even then, it was Margarita, who I was interviewing her for Joy Radio. They were doing a video for people at a International Day of People with Disabilities, which you can find on the website, by the way. It's very good. But Margarita was actually like, this is a big deal. Like, don't dismiss it. And it did make me realize how quick I am to say all that, or it would be like I find all these reasons why my success is luck, or not luck so much as pity sometimes, or tokenism. And I think it was also in this space, like being told by someone who is a leader in this space and who I just have so much admiration for, that this was a big deal, and this was because I'd achieved a lot, that I could actually have to really reconcile with how hard it was to accept that. And I think that's what this means to me. It's a sense of, my brain. One of the things I've had to really teach myself, especially over the last lockdowns, but I think this is true for a lot of folks who have emotional deregulation or who have experienced trauma, is I don't always meet reality on reality's terms. I mean, on my emotions' terms. And so I think this was that sense of, this is irrefutable evidence that you're doing something good. And you can write it off all you want, and you can tell yourself that you just do this work for, because you, for whatever reasons you want, you can tell yourself that it's not making a difference, but it is. And here's a bit of his proof. Here's a PDF that you can, and here's the thing you can add to your signature. And here's something that, does actually acknowledge that you've done work that has helped across a lot of different areas. And I think that's what it means. It's in my little, like a, systems driven brain, it's evidence in the pro column.
Absolutely, and they are indeed hotly contested awards. They really are.
I thought it was. I liked that on the website, that the website makes a point of saying that, and I figured from that I'm not the only person who finds it hard to accept, because I think there's that sense we all feel like sometimes we get told like how how much we've achieved for getting up in the morning.
Yes,
doing the bare minimum.
all the inspo porn stuff.
Exactly.
Yes,
like,
yes.
oh, you're a hero because you went, like my friend who's a wheelchair user. Oh, you went to the milk bar by yourself. That's so brave. Like, that kind of sense. So I noticed that the language being used was very much that sense of like, no, this is a big deal. You have earned it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that that is really important to me about the awards is, hey, yes, they're important to me too. Is the fact that they're fully done by disabled people. So it's very much your peers who are judging and doing all of the work behind the scenes. And
honestly, the only people I want to be judged by.
That's it. It's remarkable. So what's next for Ruby Susan Mountford?
I'm actually going to an international conference in May to give a workshop on disability inclusion in global LGBTIQ advocacy. So that's what's next. And I have to write that workshop. I think with everything with COVID, I've been very nervous. But I think that the next step for me is to, I'm still doing work in LGBTIQ plus inclusion in mainstream health. And I've enjoyed starting to kind of work on another part, but I think it's also going to be about, I want to write a book, and I want to have some time to unpack. I've been working now in jobs that have been very much focused on me understanding the ways that I'm different to other people, often in the middle of other people. And I would like to do some work that lets me focus on the ways that I'm the same.
Oh, looking forward to that. Before we finish up today, there's a question that I like to ask everybody. Who is a leader that you admire, and why?
I've mentioned her a few times now, but it's Margarita, Margarita Coppolino. Um, and I admire her because she brings everyone along. Um, there's no ego. There's just a sense of wanting the next like generation of advocates and activists to be supported and to have opportunity. And just she's the first person to reach out and message people and be like, "There's this thing going on. You should do it. You're good enough for this, and I'll stand and back you up in it." And I think she's actually the reason I applied to speak at this conference. She's wickedly funny, and she's incredibly generous, and she's I think when I first got to meet her and hear more of her story, and then just see again that she's able to understand her disability, but also recognize the way her disability is in the system. And it's not just about people like her, it's about the way these systems interact with all of us. And I've tried very hard to emulate that and to recognize that, it's not just about autistic inclusion, it's about the systems that affect disability, because much like the LGBTIQA plus community, disability is an umbrella term. The only thing the only thing we really have in common with each other is that there are parts of us that we're told don't fit, and that we're told our problem to solve and we have to overcome. There are parts of us that we are told we have to overcome to be worthy. And I think she was the first person who helped me understand why that, and being a queer person often just really sits in that middle. And as a bisexual person, as a non-binary person, is often told you've got to choose something or pick a side, or not queer enough, not trans enough, disabled enough. She sees people for where they're at and who they are and what they do. And I want to be able to take those attributes on as much as I can.
Oh, totally. The wonderful Margarita. I concur utterly. Lovely stuff. We've run out of time, Ruby.
I talk a lot. I'm not surprised.
Yes. Oh, never talk yourself down for talking. It's not an acceptable thing in my book. And thanks so much, Ruby Susan Mountford, for making time for us today. And congratulations once again on receiving the Inclusion Award in the National Awards for Disability Leadership.
Thanks, Christina.